From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the Library of Congress. I'm staggered to see so many of you here. Of course, we know the reason why, but I want to thank you for coming. My name is David Mao, and I'm the law librarian here at the Library of Congress. You are here today for our program, Magna Carta, the American Constitution. And this lecture is the third installment in a lecture series that the Law Library is sponsoring. It's part of our Magna Carta lecture series, and it's also a way for us to commemorate the Constitution, because tomorrow is the annual federal celebration of Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. So thank you, and we're delighted that we're able to join these two events together this year. As I just mentioned, Magna Carta is a big theme for us this year because, as some of you may know, in November of this year, we will be launching our great exhibition, Magna Carta, Muse and Mentor, November 6th of this year, so mark that down on your calendar. At that time, we will be having an exhibition here at the center, the centerpiece of which will be one of the existing 1215 Magna Cartas. We will be bringing the Lincoln Cathedral King John Magna Carta from Lincoln, England, to the Library of Congress, and along with the 1215 Magna Carta, we will have 70 or so items from the Library of Congress collections that will help explain the influence of Magna Carta, primarily from an American point of view. I want to also thank the American Bar Association Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress for co-sponsoring this event, and I see Liz Medaglia, the chair of the committee, sitting in the third row here. We want to wave to everybody, Liz. They have been instrumental in helping us with our Magna Carta project and with all of our related activities, so thank you again. And also the Friends of the Law Library of Congress, Kim Fan, who's sitting here in the front row, also been very, very generous in helping us with our programs. So the U.S. Constitution, which we are celebrating as part of this program, has been amended and interpreted in various ways over the years, but it really has endured since its signing by the delegates back on September 17th, 1787. It's the oldest continuing constitution in the world, and it is viewed as a document embodying strong institutions, free enterprises, and principles of freedom. Now, the Magna Carta, which was first issued more than 570 years prior to the signing of the U.S. Constitution, is the foundation for many of the most fundamental concepts of our legal system, and was also an important historical precedent for our founding fathers when they worked on the Constitution. So we're very, very excited that we can combine these two, this event today, to celebrate both of these documents. We are very fortunate today to have with us a constitutional law scholar, Akhil Amar, Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University, and he will be discussing the grand project of American constitutionalism, past, present, and future. His lecture will highlight the ways in which the American constitutional experience has both drawn upon and broken with English constitutional precursors such as the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights of 1689. For those of you who may not know, Professor Amar teaches at Yale. He teaches both at Yale College and Yale Law School, and he's an alumnus of both of those institutions. He's a leading constitutional law scholar, as I'd mentioned, and an author of many, many articles and books on the topic, the most recent being America's Unwritten Constitution, the Precedents and Principles We Live By. I also want to just put a footnote in there. I learned earlier before this meeting that Professor Amar said that he almost never misses classes, and he has made an exception for us today, so I think we're really, really very, very lucky to have him here, because he should be teaching all those law students, I guess, and so we're very delighted to have Professor Amar with us. Please join me in welcoming. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. 11 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new constitution, conceived in liberty and, alas, also conciliatory toward slavery, and destined to revolutionized the world. 77 years ago, our fathers and mothers were in the process of bringing forth upon this continent a revised constitution, a new birth of freedom. In today's remarks, I'd like to talk to you about what happened 7 years ago. I'll do the math with you this week, and I'll try to put that in the context of what happened 7 years ago, the Reconstruction of our Constitution. You heard briefly about one Lincoln connected to the Magna Carta. I'll tell you about another Lincoln and his connection to the American Constitutional Project. I'll also try to say a little bit about what happened 40 years ago. That would be Magna Carta, 800 years ago, and what happened 50 years ago when the women's suffrage, 100 years ago, when the women's suffrage revolution kicked into high gear. So ours is a broad story. It begins, though, in mid-September. So you heard David mention that mid-September is Constitution Week. September 17th is Constitution Day. What's that all about? You've heard a lot about July 4th, not enough, it seems to me, about September 17th. So I want to take you back 227 years ago. 11 score is 20 years, 11 scores 220, and 227 years ago. 11 score and 7 years ago. September 16th, 1787. And the world is, to a very considerable extent, as it has always been on that date. There's very little democracy across the planet, self-government. We here in the New World govern ourselves to a considerable extent, so there's some considerable amount of self-governance in England. The Swiss are largely self-governing. That's basically it for the planet. The rest of the world on September 16th, 1787, basically groans in chains. They're kings, emperors, sultans, Mughal lords, feudal chieftains, thugs control the planet. In the Russias, in China, in India, a British Empire with its boot on the throat of the indigenous population. Africa is not free. What's Eastern and Western Europe, apart from Switzerland, is basically not self-governing. So it's basically America, Britain, and Switzerland. That's it on September 16th, 1787. 227 years ago today. And then something happens on September 17th. Changes the world. The beginning of the year that changed everything, the hinge of human history, because today you live in a world in which half the planet by population and landmass is democratic. We won the last century. I like our odds in this century going forward. So it's a completely different world than the world of September 16th, 1787. And I claim that world that we live in is the world created, a world basically made in America and made in a certain year, the year that begins September 17th, 1787, 227 years ago tomorrow. The world changes. There is, for a secularist, there is BC and AD, before the Constitution and after the document. And we'll talk about Magna Carta, and it lays a certain foundation, but it does not change the world, because it's not just that there's no democracy, you see, on September 16th, 1787. There's no democracy on September 16th, 1687, or September 16th, 1587, or 1487, or go all the way back. Very little self-government on the planet. You had a few tiny Greek city-states, the glory that was ancient Periclean Athens under the Cleisthenic Constitution, pre-imperial Rome, Florence. You had a few little democratic projects, but these blinked out in the wink of an eye, so to speak. They did not sustain themselves over long periods of time or wide expanses of space. These were, when these democratic projects worked, as in, let's say, ancient Athens, they were people who met face to face in a single city, a polis. They worshiped the same god or gods. They had a common climate and culture and language. They didn't extend over different time zones. They didn't bring warm weather and cold weather people together. It was nothing like that. And they weren't able basically to survive against internal dissension and external attack. So it's not just that there's no democracy around the world, really. On September 16th, 1787, there really hadn't been, for recorded history, much democracy. And that is not our world today. Our world today was created when the Constitution went public. It's not these 39 great men at Philadelphia meeting behind closed doors during the summer. That's not the drama. The drama is on September 17th, when they took this proposal that they had. There were 55 people there, 39 of them stuck around to basically sign the thing, one by proxy, John Dickinson. But the drama is when they published it in publications, making it public for the people. And over the next year, the year that changed everything, the hinge of human history, up and down a continent, ordinary people would get to decide whether they accepted this proposal or not. Very optimistically, you know the words, but their very familiarity has blunted their audacity. You know the words. Here's how it begins. We, the people of the United States, do ordain and establish this Constitution. It's a deed, it's a doing. It's an act of ordainment and establishment. It's a constituting as well as a constitution. We're going to get to vote on this thing, and we can vote it up or we can vote it down, but we are going to decide how we and our posterity are to be governed, and nothing like that had ever happened before on this scale. In the history of planet Earth, the world would never be the same once we actually went public, which is on September 17th, 11 years ago precisely. That changed everything. Even, you see, the ancient Greeks, even when they had democratic constitutions, polities, they didn't have a democratic constitution-making process. One guy claiming a pipeline to God or some sort of special authority was the lawgiver. He handed it down from on high, a Solon, a Lycurgus, a Moses. The ancient Greek constitutions were not put to a vote. The vaunted British Constitution, of which Magna Carta is an important part, was never reduced to a single text. Don't tell a Brit that she doesn't have a constitution. She'll take offense, and rightly so. She's got one, but it's just not a written one. It's an unwritten one. And by the way, we've got an unwritten one too. We just have both. We have a written and an unwritten, and they actually fit together. You need an unwritten because you can't put all the rules that really govern everything in one compact document. But we put many of them in this one compact document. Britain never did that. So it never reduced the basic principles to a compact statement to be voted on by Parliament, much less the British people. So they never did that in Britain. They never did that in Switzerland prior to what we did here in America. They never did that in ancient Greece or pre-imperial Rome or Florence or any of these other prototypes of the democratic project. Let's take 1776. You heard a lot about July 4th. And by the way, you all know that we declared independence on July 2nd, 1776, right? Okay, July 4th is just the day that the Declaration of Independence was drafted, and it ill behooves me to badmouth the Declaration of Independence, framed as it was by Thomas Jefferson, whose collection will become the Library of Congress. But I'm going to do it anyway. Declaration of Independence is pretty impressive, but not put to a vote. We're in the middle of a war. The King of England, the war's already started. Lexington conquered or in the rear view mirror. And this is not a philosophy seminar, and so we don't put it to a vote. So 1776, as great as it was, is not the hinge of human history. It's John the Baptist, perhaps. You know, it's laying the foundation for what will happen before. But in 1787, the thing is put to a vote, and not just that, you see. More people are allowed to vote. Oh, and none of the state constitutions in 1776 was put to a vote. Now, if you're from Massachusetts, you know that in Massachusetts, actually, your state constitution was put to a vote, and that will become the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. And it's such a good idea that the framers of the U.S. Constitution decide to I think the entrepreneurs in the audience would say to take the idea to scale. That's, I think, what they would say. So that's what the U.S. Constitution does. It takes this idea that it was started in Massachusetts and copied in New Hampshire in 1784. They had put their constitutions to vote. Nothing in 1776, but these two state-local dress rehearsals, because that's how they look in retrospect, are brought to scale in 1787. Now the entire continent is doing it. And more people are allowed to vote that year than had ever been allowed to vote on anything before. And in 8 of the 13 states, property qualifications are lowered or eliminated for this special vote on the Constitution compared to what they otherwise would be. In New York, for example, all adult free male citizens get to vote. No race test, no religious test, no property qualifications, no literacy test. That had never been true in New York before and wouldn't be true actually for ordinary elections after. But in this one special year, this Jubilee year, so to speak, this special year, we're going to let more people participate than ever before because we're deciding how we and our posterity are to be governed. So that's pretty extraordinary. Not just that. It's not just wide participation in terms of who can vote. It's massive freedom of speech and of the press. Now you say, Professor, no, that comes from the First Amendment, and that's a few years later. That's 1789 when it's proposed in the first Congress, and 1791 when it's ratified by the requisite number of states. Professor, you're confusing the Bill of Rights with the Constitution. That comes later, Professor. That's not 1787. I say no. We get the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press from 1787, from this year that changed everything, because in the process of adopting the Constitution, it's not just unprecedented political participation who could vote, it's unprecedented free speech. You can say whatever the heck you want, and no one shuts you down. No one gets prosecuted that year. No one is politically killed that whole year. You think about just how extraordinary that is, even by today's standards. And you can get up and you can say that George Washington, he just wants power for himself. And you can say that Ben Franklin, well, his heart's in the right place, but he's a senile old coot, you know, and Thomas Jefferson wasn't there, and Patrick Henry wasn't there, and this is a big mistake, and people say all of that and worse, and no one shuts them down. Free speech is baked into our constitutional cake, unwritten, but it's part of the very process by which we, the people of the United States, in this year that changed everything, did ordain and establish the Constitution, even before it's textualized in the First Amendment in 1789, proposed by Congress in 1791, ratified the states. It's, because remember I told you there's an unwritten as well as a written Constitution. It's part of our unwritten Constitution that works hand in glove with the written Constitution. It's part of the very process by which we, the people of the United States, established the Constitution, by which we ordained and established it. What we did. Constitution is a deed, a doing, as well, an act as well as a text. And that wasn't true in 1776, great as was. Not remotely true of Magna Carta and stuff that happened before, you know. What happens in ancient Athens is, you know, if you say stuff that people don't like, you get voted off the island, you know. And that's not because they have this TV show called Survivor or whatever. It's because they have this thing called ostracism, which is about literally voting people off the island. You know, look it up. That's what an ostracism is. You take a vote, and one person loses the ostracism, and he gets voted off, and he's in exile for a number of years. We do not do that in America. In 1776, in effect, we basically voted people off the island. Not only did we not put it to a vote, there was not epic free speech. You're either with us or you're against us. This is not a philosophy seminar. This is war in 1776. And if you're not in favor of the Constitution, here are your choices. 1, leave. 2, shut up. Those are your only choices. Okay? Or you can come over to our side. You can convert. We'll accept that. No one who oppose, you're lucky if we don't tar and feather you. Worse, the King of England sent over tens of thousands of troops, a massive amphibious assault, and when they land on our shores, they're here to kill us, to slit our throats and our wives and our daughters. And if we do not hang together, Ben Franklin says, we will assuredly hang separately, and by that he means hanged by the neck till we're dead, because we're all committing treason if they win. This is not a joke. You're with us or you're against us. Not a single person who opposes the Declaration of Independence goes on to any political significance in independent America, unless they change their mind during the Revolution, you know, and come around. No one who opposes independence is basically heard from again politically. You know, they just maybe go, keep their heads down, and that's fine. By contrast, the people who oppose the Constitution in this year that changes everything, they're not voted off the island. They become presidents of the United States. James Monroe, vice presidents of the United States. Elbridge, Gary, and George Clinton, justices on the Supreme Court. Samuel Chase. It's pretty extraordinary. Who gives us our Bill of Rights? It's basically the opponents of the Constitution, the AntiFederalists to a very considerable extent. They're part of this project, even though they're opposed to the Constitution. Here's what happens in this year that changes everything. The Constitution is crowdsourced. There are only 39 people, 55 people in Philadelphia. They're smart, but they can't think of everything. If you believe in democracy, you might believe in it for reasons that the Marquis de Condorcet explained actually even before the Philadelphia Convention met, that there's a wisdom of crowds, that for certain things more heads are better than one. Not for everything. You know, if I want to know what pi really is, I'm not going to take a poll. You know, I'm going to, you know, ask a mathematician. But for certain things, many heads are better than a few. This is Condorcet jury theorem from the Marquis de Condorcet, a great Enlightenment philosopher. And the Constitution is a reflection of this idea. We crowdsource the thing. And the first thing people see, and up and down the continent, they're asked whether they want to ordain and establish it, they say, dudes, you forgot the rights. Where's the Bill of Rights? It's in a bunch of state constitutions. The English Bill of Rights of 1689 had it, and in turn, it is building on precursors like the English Habeas Corpus Act of 1679, the Petition of Right from the 1620s, and of course, all the way back to that grand old fella Magna Carta from 1215. We're going to get to him in a bit. So there is a tradition of rights declaration that goes all the way back in a way to Magna Carta. It's Magna Carta kind of perhaps misinterpreted, but interestingly so by later generations. So Magna Carta is eventually going to culminate in an English Bill of Rights in 1689, and that's in part going to lead to an American Bill of Rights in 1789, but via these ratifying conventions that met in this year that changed everything, because they said ordinary people Where are the rights? They're in state constitutions. They're in the Massachusetts Constitution. They're in the New Hampshire Constitution. You follow the good model of putting this thing to a vote, but you forgot to itemize the rights. Constitution is crowdsourced. You know, it's like Wikipedia, you know, avant la lettre. And what phrase appears in more of the Bill of Rights amendments than any other phrase? It's the phrase "the people." The First Amendment right of the people to petition and assemble, as in assembling in conventions to decide whether you're for or against the Constitution. Second Amendment right of the people to keep and bear arms. Fourth Amendment right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Ninth and Tenth Amendment rights reserved and retained by the people. The people, the people, the people, the people, the people. That's because it's coming. The Bill of Rights is from this "we the people" ratification process. That's the first thing that we do. Is when we're actually allowed to talk to each other about how we are to be governed, we say, actually, it's imperfect. And we want to make it more perfect still with a series of amendments. So that's the year that we come, and the world will never be the same, you see. The ultimate success of this project, legally, politically, economically, culturally, militarily, will change the world. The world is, I'll just share with you a personal anecdote. My parents were born in undivided India. You know, when they're born, it's under the British yoke. You know, they're every bit as much enthralled as American colonists were. Now, India is 1 billion people. It's an entire subcontinent. It's a vast diversity of religions and languages and subcultures. It's every bit as diverse as all of Europe, for example. 1 billion people governing themselves with a constitution and political parties that have free and fair elections and that alternate in power, and a fair amount of free speech and religious toleration and judicial review and the rule of law. Forget the details, whether it's parliamentary or presidential or something. That's the American model. That's 1 billion people. That's our lifetime, and it's because of the success of the American constitutional project, because of the year that changed everything. Okay, so that's what happened 7 years ago. Now, what about 7 years ago? Because you see, there was a serpent at the garden, and the serpent is slavery. And the Constitution not only didn't put slavery on a path of ultimate extinction, it made slavery powerful as a special interest group, as a force. You were taught that we have an electoral college because it's a balance of big and small states. Raise your hands if that's what you were taught. I know that's what you were taught. If that's true, how come the big state guy always wins? We've had 3 small state presidents in all of American history. Zachary Taylor, Franklin Pierce, Bill Clinton, that's it. So if it's a big state, small state balance, they were numbskulls, and they weren't numbskulls at Philadelphia. George Washington, first president, Virginia, big state, small state. The biggest. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, 3, 4, 5. The biggest state, Virginia. 32 of the first 36 years, it's the biggest state. The other 4, it's John Adams, Massachusetts. That's the second or third biggest state, depending on you count. And then John Quincy Adams. Big state guys win. It's not a House and Senate, right across the street here. That's a big state, small state balance. Oh, and by the way, big states and small states actually, that's not where the action is. Big states don't agree with each other, never have. Today, Florida, New York, California, and Texas have very little in common. Small states, Wyoming, Delaware, Rhode Island, very little in common. That's true 20 years ago, too. America isn't divided big state, small state. Never has been. But that's House Senate. It's not electoral college. You were taught because we had the electoral college because we didn't believe in democracy. Democracy is a bad word. Raise your hand if you're taught. We were a republic, professor, not a democracy. More of you were taught this. I know I was taught this. Come on now. Okay. Not true. They put the thing to a vote. We the people. Here's why you have an electoral college. If James Carville were here, here's what he'd say. It's slavery, stupid. In a direct election system, the South will lose every time because a huge percentage of its population are slaves and they don't vote. But with an electoral college, you get to count your slaves, admittedly at a discount, the 3/5 clause, but you get to count your slaves. That's why the big winner is going to be Virginia, a big state with a lot of slaves. Pennsylvania has more free people in 1800, way more voters in 1800 than Virginia, way fewer electoral votes than Virginia. Okay, and Virginia at the time, of course, initially included what's now Kentucky and West Virginia. It's slavery. Every single president is, until Lincoln, either a Southerner, slave-holding Southerner, or a Northern man, a Southern sympathy. He's a pro-slavery Northerner. And you say, well, Professor, what about John Adams and John Quincy Adams? Their vice presidents are, the vice presidential running mates are both from South Carolina. They're not anti-slavery. As president, you can't get elected. As president, John Quincy Adams talks a good game about slavery after he's no longer in the White House and he's just back old man eloquent in Massachusetts, where that stuff plays very well. Okay? There's not a single anti-slavery cabinet officer in all of American history until Abe Lincoln. By anti-slavery, I don't mean some John Brown radical. I just mean someone who says, slavery's wrong, we should get rid of it eventually, maybe even 100 years, but it'll be the death of us. Not a single cabinet officer, not a single president. Because of the 3/5 clause, conceived in liberty, but also conciliatory towards slavery. And our system almost destroys itself because of that. And don't give Thomas Jefferson the credit for the ultimate vindication. He creates a pro-slavery, I know he's connected to the Library of Congress, but he creates a pro-slavery party. They call themselves the Democrats or the Republicans. Potato, potato, it's the same thing. But they're eventually going to become the Democrat Party. By the way, if democracy is a dirty word, why is the most influential political party in antebellum America proudly call itself the Democrats? If that's some dirty word in America, it'd be like saying, oh, let's start a new party today. Let's call ourselves the Nazis, because that's a great trademark. No, okay. Thomas Jefferson forms an anti-slavery party along with James Madison. America's not divided, big state against small state. It's divided north against south. You have two elections in which the Northerner, John Adams, runs against the Southerner, Thomas Jefferson. Both times it's north against south. Southerner wins the south. Northerner wins the north. Now here's the kick in the head the second time around. You take away the 3/5. John Adams wins that second time around too. He is riding into the executive mansion on the backs of his slaves. That's what the critics say at the time. It's because of 3/5 that Thomas Jefferson wins that second time around. He wins New York, which is a slave state. That's the Ohio of that period. It's where North meets South. Okay, so they created a system more democratic than the world had ever seen, amazing, but also pro-slavery. Professor, how can it be both pro-slavery and pro-democracy? Well, the Greeks had both. All previous democracies had both. Our Constitution is in an image, if you just want, it's Jackson. Small d Democrat, man of the people, capital B Democrat, that's his party, but he's very pro-slavery. He's going to put Roger Taney in as Chief Justice, who's going to give us Dred Scott, all because of 3/5. And the system fails because of that. Slavery is getting worse and worse and worse. All the great Virginians at the founding are opposed to slavery. They think it's wrong. They're like people who are addicted to tobacco and they know it's wrong. They can't quit, but they don't want their grandkids to start. That's George Washington, that's Thomas Jefferson, that's James Madison, that's George Mason, all the great Virginians, George Witt. By 1850, you have proud slaveholders. Slavery is a good thing. It's like a really good thing. Oh, it's so much better than what you've got in the North. We take care of our slaves in their old age. Oh, it's wonderful. We Christianize them. They're so much better off than they would be in Africa. They're not saying that stuff in 1789. They know it's wrong. But our Constitution creates a system that actually rewards slavery, gives slavery more political power. The more slaves you have, the more clout you have in the House of Representatives and the Electoral College because of the 3/5 clause, and our system almost destroys itself because of that. And people take up arms against a duly elected government because they're kind of like, Nazis avant la lettre. They're tyrants. Slavery is tyrannical in its fundamental essence, and it corrupts. It's a cancer that grows and grows and grows. And so don't give Thomas Jefferson the credit for any of this. His system, he creates a Democrat Party. They almost destroy everything. But in the ashes of the Civil War, our system is reborn. 7 years ago. the 1860s. 1867 is 7 years ago. And we get rid of slavery with the 13th Amendment, and we promise black citizenship with the 14th Amendment, equality and political equality. Black men are going to get to vote equally, not just one person, one vote, one time in New York, but every time, everywhere after the 15th Amendment. And that's this new birth of freedom. And Lincoln, amazingly, and here I'm going to get to Magna Carta in just a minute and tell you about women's suffrage. He's very generous, but he's also politically brilliant. He gives the credit to Jefferson, you see, to some very important sense. He's appropriating the other party. His party is formed against the Democrat Party, okay? But he's saying something nice about Jefferson the same way Barack Obama says something nice about Ronald Reagan, the same way that Ronald Reagan said something nice about FDR, but he's trying to actually appropriate, to some extent, the power of that other party for his own purposes. So what does he say? He says, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Okay, that's Jefferson's language from 1776. But Lincoln actually means it in a different way. Because if Jefferson really meant all men and women, well, then he's a hypocrite, because he never frees his slaves, he dies a slaveholder, and he knows it's wrong. And if he didn't mean it, then Lincoln is reinterpreting it. Either way, it's bad for Jefferson. There's no real good way, if you really think seriously, that Jefferson comes out looking great, given. But Lincoln reads him at his best and reinterprets him. And that reinterpretation is now put into the text of the 14th Amendment. The word equal gets put in a phrase, equal protection. The first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which is a vindication of Lincoln. Lincoln is talking about a new birth of freedom. The 14th Amendment begins with the idea that everyone is born equal. The 14th Amendment begins with the sentence, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, and therefore equal citizens. We are all born citizens, we are all born equal citizens, we are all created equal. This is a reinterpretation, to some very important extent, of the founding. Maybe it's not quite Jefferson's idea, but now it's a new birth of freedom, a new generation, and that's how our Constitution works. Part of the unwritten Constitution is how to read earlier texts in light of later texts, like the 14th Amendment. And that's going to be the same story as Magna Carta, which I'll get to in just 5 minutes. So at the very end. So we call it the Bill of Rights. It doesn't call itself the Bill of Rights. When you look at the Constitution, it doesn't have that phrase in it. In England, there's a thing called the Bill of Rights in 1689. There's, in many state constitutions, the official caption of this rights section is the Declaration of Rights or Bill of Rights. It's not in the U.S. We call it that because the framers of the 14th Amendment called it that. We called the First Amendment, it was originally the third on the list. It wasn't first for the founding generation, it was third, but it's first for the Reconstruction generation who kind of creatively reinterpreted. We think that the First Amendment, what we call the First Amendment, has speech and press and religion yoked together because it's about religious speakers. But the framers of the First Amendment didn't think that that's why they were linked together. No state constitution links together religion and speech and press. The framers of the 14th Amendment thought it was about preachers in the pulpit preaching against slavery. So they saw the connection between religion and political speech and press, but the framers didn't. And we interpret all of this through the lens of the later amendment. Even if it's a misinterpretation, it's a misinterpretation that is codified in a later text. It's like, I think it was Ma Ferguson who said, if English was good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for me. And speaking of English, you see, Magna Carta is not even written in English. I don't know what the hell it says. Most of you don't. It's like Latin. We today read it as if it says law of the land, but that's a later translation of it. We today, and the Constitution is, remember, the supreme law of the land in Article 6. We today say, no one can be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's actually in the Fifth Amendment Bill of Rights. It's in the 14th Amendment, the Lincoln generation reinterpretation. And we say due process of law, and that means, and that builds on what was originally chapter 39 or 29, depending on how you count, of this Magna Carta from 1215, 800 years ago. But in 1215, it wasn't about jury trial. Americans think it is. My Lord Coke thinks this. Later generations of Englishmen read Magna Carta as if it's about jury trial. And later generations of Americans read Magna Carta as if it's about jury trial. But in 1215, it's not quite about jury trial. Jury trial is just getting going. They're still doing trial by battle and trial by ordeal. The Pope in 1215 is just that year actually saying no more ordeals anymore. Jury of peers means like barons, peers, lords, like as in the peerage. It's not about like ordinary people in jury trial. The barons at Runnymede don't give a damn about ordinary people, commoners. Later generations of Englishmen and Americans are going to reinterpret Magna Carta in some very interesting ways, in the same way that you and I reinterpret what we call the Bill of Rights, the original Constitution, through the prism of a later constitutional amendment. Let me give you one example here. You going to pull that up on the screen for me? Thanks. Let's talk about this very uncontroversial thing called the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And I know, everyone agrees, of course, on what it all means. And here in D.C., I know this is the land of Heller. Okay. See that top picture there? That's the original Second Amendment vision. That's the Battle of Bunker Hill. It's a painting by John Trumbull. I have to just mention that he's a Yale man. And that the original of this, now many of his hang in the Capitol building, his great epic paintings of the American Revolution and Constitutional period in the rotunda, but some of them are also in the replicas or other versions in the Yale University Art Gallery. This is the most famous political painting in America. It's the Battle of Bunker Hill, and the good guys are the local militia on your left, and the bad guys are the redcoats. They symbolize death, destruction, plague, pestilence. This is the original Second Amendment vision. When guns are outlawed, only the king's men will have guns. Arms bearing is localist and political and military and collectivist. It's about militias. Okay? That's actually the Second Amendment. It's Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill. Okay, and that's why in 1776, this is not a philosophy seminar. The fighting's already begun, dying's begun. You're with us or against us. That's the founding vision. It's about local militias. And by the way, do you see in the far right corner of the screen, one kind of little sort of dark figure? That's one black person in the corner of the screen, not big part of the story. That is not the vision of arms bearing that we have today in America, and here's why. Because the vision of arms bearing was transformed during the Civil War. Look at the bottom picture. That is from Harper's Weekly from 77 years ago. That's from the 1860s. It's called the Freedmen's Bureau. The guy who's painting that, or doing that drawing, is punning on the earlier one. Don't you see the similarities? The flag of the central government in the middle. The one black person, stage right, has now become a lot of black people. The militia, stage left, has become sort of Klansmen. Okay? You see the difference and the similarity? Flag, flag. One black person, lots of black people. These guys have become these guys. Okay? And this isn't like random. This isn't monkeys and Shakespeare. This is an artistic illusion because everyone in America knows that first one. But now, it's a different vision. The good guys are the central government. The army in the middle, they're not bad guys. Under the flag is no longer the Union Jack that we never voted for. It's our American flag that we fought the Civil War about. The good guys are the central government. And they stand for the flag and the Constitution and order, and they will protect black people in their homes on one side from white marauders on the other side, Klansmen, because now, and that's a new vision of what we will call the right to keep and bear arms. It is individualistic and nationalistic and private and non-military. Individuals have to have guns in their homes, especially black people, because if you don't have a gun in your home, no one will protect you. You can't count on the local constabulary when the Klan comes calling. Top picture, when guns are outlawed, only the king's men will have guns. Bottom picture, when guns are outlawed, only Klansmen will have guns. That is the modern image of arms bearing. The National Rifle Association was founded after the Civil War by a group of ex-Union Army officers, led by Burnside, I believe. And so we today are the product of many generations of constitutional advancement. Yes, we are the children of 1787, but that was transformed in the Civil War. Its pro-slavery elements were repudiated. The original Bill of Rights is much more localist. It begins with the words, Congress shall make no law, ... and today's Tea Party just says, Congress shall make no law, ! Okay, and it ends, just no law of any sort, and they're coming close. And it ends with the 10th Amendment. The original Bill of Rights is a response to anti-federalist Tea Party skepticism, but that's not fully our Constitution today. Our Constitution was transformed in a Civil War in which the good guys were the national government and the bad guys were the local militias, and we have a 14th Amendment creating a Bill of Rights against the states and the localities and not just against Congress, and you and I are the products of all of that, and we read all that back into the earlier texts, even though it doesn't quite say so. That's part of our unwritten Constitution. How much of the book of Isaiah is reinterpreted in light of the New Testament? So Christians do not say, a young woman shall give birth. They say, Isaiah says, a virgin shall give birth. Christians read the Old Testament through the prism of the New Testament, a later set of scriptures. Americans, Christian or not, read our Constitution in light of later constitutional interpretations, maybe misinterpretations, okay? They thought speech and press were connected to religion for a different set of reasons. They thought the First Amendment was first because it was, supposed to be first, even though it was only accidentally first. But those later amendments are part of our constitutional tradition in the same way that the misinterpretations of Magna Carta by later generations actually today are important parts of what Magna Carta really means. It may not matter in the deepest sense for all purposes that originally it wasn't about jury trial. It came to be about jury trial in later, not just interpretations, but enactments. Let me end, because I did promise, and I'm so glad that there are a lot of folks of the female persuasion in the audience as well as of the male persuasion. I promised I'd just say a little bit about woman suffrage, Hillary Clinton. So we're not done in 1860s. Yes, black men get the vote, but what about women? That's going to be still later generation. A doubling of the franchise 50 years ago, 100 years ago is when it's kicking into high gear. And that amendment, the 19th Amendment, a glorious amendment, see, now no one today should sensibly read the words, all men are created equal, with a gendered male. It's all humanity is created equal. All persons are created. All men and women are created equal. We are all born equal. The birth equality idea is such a powerful one. It's that we are born equal, black and white, male and female, Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, whether you're born in wedlock or out of wedlock, whether you're firstborn or thirdborn. We shouldn't have primogeniture and entail rules. I would say whether you're born gay or straight. We're in the middle of a great national conversation about that interpretation. But this birth equality idea, it's a very powerful one. And at the deepest level, does it really matter totally what was in Thomas Jefferson's head, great man though he was, and connected as he is indelibly with the Library of Congress, but does it really matter at the end? Because the guy dies a slaveholder, and he never frees his slaves, and he knows it's wrong, so I just have to get that off my chest. And that's because I grew up so admiring him that he kind of disappointed me the most, I think. And James Madison, too. And as great as Lincoln's generation was, they didn't, what about Abigail Adams and remembering the ladies? And that's a later generation still. And here's the point. The words themselves in the 19th Amendment do not say that women get to vote equally on juries. That's part of an unwritten constitution, but of course they do. If you can vote, you should be able to vote equally, you should be able to vote equally on juries. It doesn't say explicitly that they get to vote equally in a legislature, but of course you can't prevent women from serving in, a woman's place, I once saw this little sign, a woman's place is in the House and the Senate. The right to vote doesn't explicitly say a right to be voted for. So here's a hypothetical. Suppose some state in the next election says, we're not going to allow the name of, let's say it's Ohio, and it's controlled, let's say, by one party. This is just fanciful, of course. And they're worried about a presidential candidate of another party. And so they get a law through, and the law says no female will be allowed to have the name on the ballot. Now, is that unconstitutional? I think that's obviously so. But when and how did that become unconstitutional? Because at the founding, only men are voting, only men are present. It says he, him, his, all throughout Article 2, and they mean he, him, his. They're always talking about whether presidents are going to be like kings. No one ever asks, is the president going to be like a queen? And they have experience with queens. Virginia's named for, Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. William and Mary is named for a female co-monarch. So I don't think, of course, at the founding, a state of Ohio or any other state could say women can't be president. And after the Civil War, I think still, of course, women can't vote. How can they serve it? So if you believe, as I do, that a woman has an absolute right to run for president on equal terms, I think it's the 19th Amendment or nothing. It's not it's not Magna Carta. It's not what these barons at Runnymede were agreeing with King John about, and it's not 11 years ago, and it's not 7 years ago, it's 5 years ago. We, the people of the United States, revolutionized yet again our project by bringing women in as full and equal political participants, even though it doesn't say all of that explicitly, even though I'm reading the spirit as well as the letter of the 19th Amendment. I'm combining the written Constitution with an unwritten Constitution. And that's, my fellow Americans, I think, what we all have to do. So I end basically by saying, as great as Magna Carta is, as great as 1776 is, it really did start our modern world 227 years ago this week. 7 years ago. It started then, but it didn't end then. It's still ongoing. And here's the last thing I guess I want you to think about. What should our Constitution look like in 2020? What should it look like 7 years in the future? Constitution of America and the world. What should it look like 7 years from now? Or 40 years from now? What should America and the world look like? The framers, 227 years ago, they put forth a document talking about securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Well, we were their posterity. I think we also need to think about our posterity. And I think if we're going to think seriously about the future, we have to take seriously the past. We have to take seriously where we came from, and the claim is it really did all begin 7 years ago this week. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to take some questions. I know some of you have to get going, but happy to hear your comments or questions.
in terms of the full and equal rights of people and the unwritten Constitution, and we now have blacks being equal and gays getting equal and women being equal.
Yep.
Your feeling on atheists and things like "In God We Trust" and "Unto God in Our Pledge of Allegiance," do you think they at some point will be full and equal as well?
Wow, that's a really good question. I do think that our norms have evolved on that. Just if I'm describing the Supreme Court case law, here are two basic principles to describe where the case law basically is. The older a particular practice is, the more likely it's to be upheld. So if we added "In God We Trust" today to the coins, there'd be a lot more judicial pushback. But it was added in the 1860s, so it has kind of receded. And the more sectarian the references, if it were "In Jesus We Trust" or "In Allah We Trust." So the case law today has not fully reached what it might one day reach, which is basically that the government really has no business saying anything theological. That's just not its proper role. Here's what I can tell you about the Constitution, which is pretty extraordinary. I told you about some of the things that it does say. Here's what it doesn't say. It doesn't actually have explicit references to God, as almost all the state constitutions of the time did. The Declaration talks about our Creator, and the Constitution actually doesn't. The Constitution actually prohibits, way before the First Amendment, religious tests for federal office holding. That at a time when no state constitution prohibits religious tests. Only one state, in fact, prohibits religious tests. That's Virginia, and does so by a statute that could be changed the next day. And 10 or 11 of the states actually have religious tests and have them most of them in their state constitutions themselves. Most state constitutions, in order to hold office, require people, and it varies from state to state, to believe in Protestantism or the Trinity, or Christianity, or God. There are just a whole series of religious tests in the different states, and there's none of that. What's really interesting about, for example, the presidential oath, which is prescribed word for word, is partly what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, "So help me God." People are allowed to say that as a matter of private religious choice, and many modern presidents have. There's a debate about whether George Washington did or not, although he kissed a Bible at that ceremony, and he swore on a Bible. That's actually, our Constitution was far more sort of secular than its state counterparts. I did say that I think we are all equal, Jew and Gentile, and that's one way of understanding sort of, many states had established churches before the Civil War, but none by the time of the Civil War. So it's a very good example of genuine change. But today there are not 5 votes, I believe, to get rid of the words "Under God" in the pledge, or the words "In God We Trust" on the coinage, or the practice right across the street of commencing every court session with "God save, this honorable court." But who knows what the world will look like? Ours is still a very Christian country, Protestant country, actually, overwhelmingly. Supreme Court, mainstream Protestant country. There's not one mainstream Protestant on the court. There's 6 Catholics and 3 Jews. Let's take the 4 people who ran for president and vice president last time around. A Mormon. Mormonism didn't even exist at the founding. A Catholic, Paul Ryan, a Catholic, Barack Obama. There's only one Protestant of the group. And he's one that the framers would have had, it would have been odd, because he's, of course, African-American, too. Let's look at John Boehner, he's Catholic. Let's look at Harry Reid, he's Mormon. So our culture has been pretty extraordinary. It's a religious country, and of the 4 guys up there on Mount Rushmore, 2 of them are not kind of conventional church-going Christians. They are more religious free thinkers, Thomas Jefferson and Abe Lincoln. So really, it's a great, great question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you for this talk. I must say that I come from a different legal background. I did my legal studies in the Netherlands.
Yes.
At the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Which, is a certain debate between case law and continental law, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to get into that. But what I'm interested in what you are saying is obviously you're talking about the ongoing evolutionary process of law, in lawmaking, in constitutional making, constitutional interpretation, right?
And amendment.
And amendment, obviously. But there's a big problem with that. I don't want to get in critical legal studies and stuff like that. But you were talking about how the unwritten Constitution obviously helps in the interpretation of the written Constitution and often kind of pushes up against the limitations inherent in the written Constitution,
yes,
and pushes away that. But there's also problems inherent in the unwritten Constitution.
Absolutely.
Right? And this can also lead to problems if you want to turn the unwritten Constitution into a written Constitution moving forward, right? But the big problem in all of this is for those that you talk about slavery, right? There's still ongoing tremendous amount of discrimination and marginalization that minorities or others face in the society, whatever type of othering they may be, right? That, because you're evolutionary, often it kind of effaces the problems here and now, right? Don't worry. Yes, I know you are facing problems. Yes, I know you're facing discrimination. Less I know this and that. But things are getting better. So, eventually things will get better.
Yeah.
But the problem is here and now.
Yeah.
Here and now I'm a slave. Here and now I'm being brutalized. Here and now I can't get a job. Et cetera, et cetera. Another problem, you ended talking about, what is the Constitution to come? Obviously, America is undergoing tremendous change right now, right? America in 40, 50 years out will not be the most powerful country in the world anymore. China, in all probability, will be India, other countries to come. It will be powerful, but certainly not the most powerful country in the world. Its demographic makeup will not be Protestant, Anglo-Saxon dominant anymore. It'd be, a mixed-up society, a changed society, majority,
I would say
minority.
a mixed society. I hope not mixed up.
A mixed. Well, mixed up, I mean, is going to be ethnically much more diverse.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Good.
But so one of the big problems and limitations in American Constitution is not having socioeconomic rights. Do you see a move more towards that with this type of thing?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot there. A lot there. Two thoughts. Maybe three. One, I believe that we have a written Constitution and it's our sheet anchor and we don't want to give it up because I'm very glad that there's this thing called the First Amendment and that Congress can't make flag burning a crime or criticizing incumbents a crime, even if they call it campaign finance reform. And I'm kind of glad that it's not so easy to amend. As a young man, I thought, oh, it's too hard to amend. Things could be so much better. Now, as an old man, I say, they could be a lot better, but they could be a lot worse. And in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of bad amendment proposals sort of fail. Marriage is one man, one woman. Flag burning should be a crime in the Constitution itself. Last week, the Senate was debating, I think, an ill-conceived amendment to the First Amendment about campaign finance. There are, I believe in campaign finance reform. I don't think that was actually a very well-drafted amendment proposal. And it failed because it's hard to amend. So we have a written and an unwritten Constitution, and they work together. I don't want the unwritten to undermine the written. I want it to work together, to supplement. The written doesn't tell us how to interpret it. So rules of interpretation are themselves unwritten. So we need an unwritten, but we don't want it to undermine the written. That's the first point. We have to have both, and they have to fit together in a certain way. The unwritten has to supplement, without supplanting and undercutting the written. That's one. Two, one of the most interesting aspects of the American constitutional project is actually we have 51 constitutions and not just one. We have 50 state constitutions, and the state constitutions often are dress rehearsals for federal reform. Massachusetts put the Constitution to a vote first, and then New Hampshire did. States had bills of rights first, and so the omission seemed really obvious to the anti-federalist critics. Many states got rid of slavery first. States gave recognized black equality first. States, several of them gave women suffrage first. So states, this is a Brandeisian point, Louis Brandeis, Laboratories of Democracy. States actually are working out very interesting reforms that can be copied by sister states and then eventually used as models for federal emulation. Almost everything in our US Constitution, actually, states did first. Almost everything. Interestingly enough, which is, by the way, why, let's say, the Electoral College looks so weird, because that's not how you pick your governor in any state. You know, basically, call us crazy, but in California, we just put all the, we count all the votes, and if it's close, we recount them carefully. Call us crazy, but that's how we Californians do it, and that's how we Texans do it, and that's how we New Yorkers do it, and that's how we do it in all the states. So the Electoral College looks weird. So finally, what will be the amendments of the future? Here's my prediction about what they will be and my prescription about what they should be. One, they should add to liberty and equality, not take away. All our amendments thus far have added to liberty and equality, except for prohibition, which didn't work. Both parties are going to have to agree on them because it's hard to get 2/3, 2/3, 3/4. And states are going to have to road test these ideas first. Now, here's an interesting thing. A lot of state constitutions do have affirmative social and economic rights, rights to education and welfare and the rest. Not so much explicitly in the federal constitution, but in many state constitutions. So one interesting question is, have these been good features of state constitutions? Which ones might be particularly worthy of federal emulation? Here's one reason why you might get an amendment changing the Electoral College, because you could. One, it adds to equality because it's actually one person, one vote. It's an equal idea. It's an idea about voter equality. Two, states basically have road tested this idea. They're called governors. In 48 of the 50 states, your governor is a mini president. He or she is elected independently, 4-year term, except in New Hampshire and Vermont, veto pen, pardon pen. Looks a lot like a president, but you pick that person, one vote, not with Electoral College. So it adds to equality. States have road tested it first, and actually both parties might support this move. Here's why in the next 10 years. The Democrats are going to support this because we just believe in one person, one vote. We're just principled that way. It may be silly. Republicans will increasingly come to support this because actually they are going to see that the Electoral College right now is beginning to tilt in favor of the Democrat Party. As late as 2000, I think the Electoral College was not skewed one way or the other. It ended up helping George Bush. It could have helped Al Gore on Election Day. John Kerry, if he had gotten 60,000 more votes in Ohio, would have won the presidency, even though he lost the national popular vote by a couple million. But increasingly, Karl Rove and other Republicans, when they do the math, they're going to see that Democrats actually are more likely to lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College than Republicans. And when that happens, and I can, afterward, I'll be happy to show you the electoral math, but just basically, the Democrats have a lock on states adding up to about 190 electoral votes. Republicans have a lock on states adding up to about 110 electoral votes. You only need to get to 270. Democrats have many more pathways to 270. Republicans have to fill an inside straight. It's harder for them to do that. State constitutions are important. Federalism is important in America. It gave us written constitutions and putting constitutions to a vote and bills of rights and abolition and women's suffrage, and it could, in the future, give us direct election of the presidency.
Time for one more question, so I'm afraid there's going to be...
Okay, yeah, because my answers were too long, filibustering and all of that. I apologize.
Professor Amar will be available.
Okay. I am. I will not leave until, the last dog dies. So I came all the way down to meet you guys.
Thank you for that lecture. You make a very persuasive case about the evolution of ideas in American democracy. But I wonder if you could comment to us about something a little different, about the status of American institutions in constitutional democracy, which is a little different, coming at it from perhaps some of your colleagues at Yale and study American political development. They don't have as rosy of a view on the evolution of institutions as what you've outlined on the evolution of ideas. In particular, Fukuyama has just published this big book about really critical of the structural components of the Constitution, the fact that the separated powers system simply doesn't work to keep alive a modern bureaucratic state. So I want to know what you think about specifically separation of powers.
Excellent.
And where does the United States, I mean, is this something we should have learned from the Westminster system of government?
So it's a perfect last question because I can connect it to the previous one. So maybe separation of powers is a bad idea, but here's the interesting thing. Every state has that model, and that's not required. No state picks its governor by the state legislature, prime minister style, and they could. And on September 16th, 1787, 8 of the 13 states actually did pick their governors prime minister style through legislative selection. So actually, America wasn't born separation of powers across the board. It became that states chose to move from parliamentary systems of executive selection toward actually a more separation of powers presidential model. They've chosen in every state to make their governor look like a mini president. So it may very well, I think there are advantages of parliamentary systems. I think there are advantages of separation of power systems. I don't think one works across the board. We've made ours, I think, actually work well enough. Maybe it's slightly dysfunctional. Maybe it's the English system and the metric system is better, but conversion costs are considerable. The young Amar didn't sort of think about transition and conversion costs. The older Amar is becoming a little bit more fuddy-duddy. But the older Amar is interested in data, and the basic point is none of our states have done that. So we're not going to get to a less separated system, a more parliamentary system, unless states road test it first and show it works here. Now, here are some disadvantages to the parliamentary system. So, at the risk of offending David Cameron, but he has no mandate whatsoever. It was a three-way vote, and it was a hung verdict, 3 different parties, and at the end of it, no one had any idea, if you recall just what happened in the moments after that election, whether you were going to have a labor conservative coalition of national unity, or a liberal labor alliance on the left, or what we ended up getting, this weird thing, Tory conservative and liberal, Cameron and Clegg, odd couple of stuff. And you had no idea that's what you were going to get because that was all done, wheeling and dealing of politicians after the election. People didn't know what they were really getting. In a parliamentary system, you have to vote at the same time for Parliament and the executive branch. You can't split your ticket. Everything is up for grabs in a single election. If my party loses this time around, I'm a Democrat, in a low turnout election, I'm not going to lose everything because I actually, my party won 4 years ago in the presidency, and we won on other elections staggered in the Senate, and so not everything is up for grabs at every election, which is in a parliamentary system, everything is up for grabs every election, and it could be a low turnout election, and these people might claim mandates for all sorts of things that they really don't have mandates for, and in America, you don't get to do really big things unless basically your party controls House, Senate, and the presidency, which means you have to win a series of elections, each one kind of aggregated slightly differently. States are different than congressional districts, are different than the presidency. You have to win a series of elections aggregated differently because there's no perfect way of aggregating, and that's not a ridiculous way of doing it. And yeah, we're in trouble, but I don't think Britain is in any better shape, truth be told. And I don't think the parliamentary systems are in any better shape just in general. I basically do think if you want to know, and so there's a lot of discontent and unhappiness. Here's my diagnosis of why. I'll be straight with you. Because ours is a two-party system, and it works when we have two healthy parties. And today, it just happens to be the case that one half of our two great parties have gone bonkers. And that's just a transitional thing, and no system will solve that. Parliamentary systems will not solve that problem, and we're just going to have to wait that out. And we had a massive recession that made a lot of people very sour and looking for scapegoats, and we're still working our way through that. And here, and because, I'll end actually on a sober, Fukuyama-like, but I hope inspiring note. Here's why things are harder for us, and why they're, because we are winning. What success looks like is that the rest of the world is becoming more American. Now, yes, we are becoming more global. That's another thing that you said, my friend. You know, we are becoming the world, not maybe, I hope not mixed up, but more mixed. We are the place in the world where all the peoples of all the countries are actually meeting and intermarrying and talking to each other in great national conversations like the one begun 227 years ago this week. So we are becoming more global. You know, New York is the capital of the world. It's an amazing place, and DC and San Francisco and LA, where North meets South and East meets West. But the rest of the world is becoming more American, so we're competing with ourselves. So of course there's going to be an evening up. This is good for the planet, even though it creates more competition. They're copying our success stories. Here's what they're doing. They have the rule of law in more places, democracy in more places, free and fair elections in more places, free speech and religious toleration in more places. They used to have huge thuggish military establishments that killed their own peoples and killed each other. They're not doing so much of that anymore. Good for the world. We, contrary-wise, for the first time, really, have a massive military-industrial complex. We didn't have any standing army in peacetime for the first 150 years. We had all this free land that we could steal from the Indians, so that was a good, but that was like a one-time thing. So now, the rest of the world, we're paying for sort of Pax Americana for the rest of the world. They're copying our model to some considerable extent in ways that are good. That's what success looks like. That they're actually becoming, in a deep way, more American. So I don't think their success is because they're parliamentary and we're presidential. I think they're not doing better than us. We're all, becoming great democracies of the world. And that's what progress looks like. And all of that, the world is becoming American. All of that is because of the year that changed everything, the hinge of human history, that started on September 17th, 1787. Thank you.
Thank you again to Professor Amar for that terrific lecture. Just quickly, since we have run over, with all due respect to Professor Amar, 12:15, November 6th of this year, we will be celebrating the 800th anniversary, the beginning of the 800th anniversary celebration of Magna Carta. So please come back to the Library of Congress for that. And if you do have some time, I have some colleagues here who are interested in talking to you about what you thought of our program, and they're just taking some quick surveys on iPad. So if you have a few minutes, just please stop and speak with them. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you at our next program.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.